In the summer of 2017, the credit reporting agency Equifax lost the highly sensitive personal data of over 143 million consumers. The immediate fallout included executive dismissals, severe reputational damage, and regulatory penalties soaring into the hundreds of millions of dollars. When a breach of this magnitude hits the news, it's easy to imagine a team of elite hackers deploying an unstoppable, highly sophisticated cyber weapon. But the reality is usually far more mundane. The attackers who compromised Equifax simply walked through a well-known vulnerability in a web framework called Apache Struts. It wasn't a secret zero-day flaw. A software patch to fix the bug had been publicly available from the vendor for months. How does a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, armed with state-of-the-art security teams, fail to apply a heavily documented, readily available software update? The answer is that catastrophic data breaches rarely stem from failed technology. They almost always trace back to a broken organizational process. This graphic illustrates the traditional approach to vulnerability management. For years, organizations relied on periodic automated network scans that simply dumped thousands of unpatched flaws into massive, static PDF reports. Scanning massive enterprise subnetworks without an automated way to triage the results creates a severe operational bottleneck. Security teams end up dropping unprioritized spreadsheets onto the desks of IT operations, burying them under thousands of so-called critical alerts. Generating raw data without internal business context doesn't make an organization safer. It creates an environment of alert fatigue and operational paralysis, which actually hides the most viable attack paths. This flowchart breaks down a classic corporate friction point. Security teams discover the flaws, but IT systems operations teams hold the access required to patch them. Without strict SLA-driven ownership mapping these domains together, critical vulnerabilities sit completely unresolved in the gap between the departments. That communication gap is widened by a heavy reliance on the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS. CVSS calculates a technical severity score from 0 to 10 based entirely on theoretical attributes. It evaluates the vulnerability completely in a vacuum, ignoring the real-world environment. For example, a flaw rated 9.8 on a harmless, highly isolated test server containing fake data looks mathematically identical on paper to that exact same 9.8 flaw sitting on an internet-facing production financial database. If you force an IT team to patch every finding purely by that baseline technical severity, they will waste vast amounts of engineering resources fixing non-exposed assets while leaving high-probability entry points wide open. To solve this, modern enterprises deploy risk-based vulnerability management. This framework injects dynamic threat intelligence and internal business context directly into the evaluation loop. This document shows the underlying multidimensional matrix. It starts by taking that baseline CVSS severity, but then multiplies it by the internal criticality of the asset and its specific level of network exposure. Looking at this next diagram, you can see how live external threat intelligence completes the equation. It feeds in exploit prediction scoring system probabilities and the Federal Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog to mathematically determine if cybercriminals are actively weaponizing that specific flaw in the wild. By running findings through this algorithm, a security team can safely filter out the theoretical noise and focus their finite engineering resources exclusively on the exposed flaws that actively threaten the business. Consider what would have happened to the Equifax Apache Struts flaw if it had been evaluated under this modern, risk-driven framework. Because that specific vulnerability carried a high technical severity and resided directly on a core, public-facing production asset, the algorithm would have instantly separated it from the thousands of other daily alerts and pushed it to the absolute top of the remediation queue. That high-risk classification would then automatically trigger a strict corporate service level agreement, demanding an emergency patch deployment across the enterprise within 48 hours. True defense is built on the engineering of a system that mathematically enforces the timeline to fix every discovered flaw. This diagram of the security lifecycle overview highlights how these processes must function today. In modern, highly ephemeral cloud environments, vulnerability management cannot be a monthly chore. It has to be a continuous, always-on loop of discovery, validation, and remediation. Here, we see how that continuous data feeds directly into real-time executive dashboards. Instead of reading technical jargon, leadership can instantly track exact compliance metrics and see exactly which engineering departments are meeting their required patch windows. The 2017 breaches taught the corporate world a harsh, repetitive lesson. The financial and operational cost of diligent remediation planning is only a fraction of the devastating cost of remediation negligence.